All right, so welcome once more to today's session for quality assessment in systematic review practice or systematic review. So, if you have any question, you can just speak out because I'm not going to be looking at the chat box once again. All right, so first of all, this was serving as an exemplary draft for us doing our illustration. You know, where I talked about, I'm sure whether you're from the Nexus laboratory, or you're currently in the lab for this particular systematic review publication, one thing hasn't changed, which is the need for us to have a rigorous screening, of any particular evidence. So what do we mean by quality assessment? Quality assessment simply entails, the process. It's just that particular, protocol, process, or procedure that we embark on to make sure that we have very, very reputable, evidence that we want to use to answer our research question. So you've raised the research question and you've particularly selected, lots of studies, and that means for you to be able to go ahead with those studies, it's very, very imperative, it's very crucial, it's essential, right? It's very pertinent that you ascertain the quality of those primary studies that has been published. So these are the things that we've talked about. I'm sure if you're from the Nexus laboratory doing diverse sessions with your tutor, Dr. Presh, she must have, stressed about what quality assessment entails. So quality assessment is not different from when you go to, when you want to, you know, when you want to go into the field to collect your primary data, you need to make sure that the knife and the cutlass, the gun you want to use to go into the research field to go and shoot down people, you need to make sure that it has enough bullets and it has enough quality bullets that can be able to gun people down. So that means when you want to do a systematic review, we all know that systematic review involves the inclusion of primary papers. And that means for you to include these primary papers, we need to be sure that these primary papers have enough, they have been properly conducted for us to do what? Include them into our what? Systematic review. That means if you're trying to say that, let's say, for example, if you're trying to say that usage of condoms prevents HIV and AIDS, for example. So that means if that is a systematic review conclusion, if that is coming from a systematic review conclusion, that means you've reviewed at least 10 primary articles that you are trying to explore usage of condoms for what? Prevention of what? Sexually transmitted diseases. And in that situation, it means that for you to come up with a systematic review conclusion that usage of condoms is going to prevent HIV and AIDS, that means a lot of those primary studies has been screened. You've screened the aims, you've used the checklist to screen the design, you've used the checklist to screen diverse domains of that particular article to be able to come up with that what conclusion. So now the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to do just two things now. For those of us that I'm tutoring based on this particular publication, we're just going to have a scratch, view of this, then introduce a checklist, that will guide us for what? The quality assessment. So if you guys can recall, Ms. Dr. IBK, I gave you guys an assignment. I asked people to go and classify the studies. But from a rough view, from what I can see here, it seems that some of you are still lacking in terms of, okay, yeah, I think the what it means from here is that we said you guys said that we had 60 included studies. Is that clear? 60 studies we have found, if I'm correct.
Yes, you're
Yeah,
correct. Please, can we answer? Can we all talk, please?
yes,
Please,
it's
we need to respond.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, it's recorded. So we found 60 studies, right? For a systematic review. And yes, and like I said, I asked you guys to work on develop your the manuscript, which is the to organize the manuscript. That was the first task, which I am going to look at the end of this session because I haven't seen it. So that means for you to include for you to conduct a systematic review, right? What is primary is that one very one very essential option is that you have to include original peer-reviewed publications. But then from what we can see here, you know, we have review studies. I just saw review studies. Now, when you say observational studies, I think what we need to do is that observational study is more like a form of is a form of research, right? Now, what we're interested in here now is the what? The design. So we can have when we want to classify we have observational studies, which is different from design type of study. Type of studies by design. So observational study can be a cross-sectional, cross-sectional, it can be a cohort, it can be a case control, etc. So these distinctions in designs can inform our type of what critical appraisal too. Because what one very important thing we said in the systematic review quality assessment is that what we use in conducting our quality assessment are what we call critical appraisal tools. So we have diverse critical appraisal tools. We have the randomized, we have the Cochrane risk of bias tool. We have the Joanna Briggs Institute tool. We have the mixed math tool. We have the Newcastle Ottawa scale. We have the short. We have a lot of tools. You know, there are diverse of them, and I talked about them. So each of those tools are informed by the design. So what it means is that our assignment might be seeming incomplete because if we go through this, you know, we have actually brought up diverse observational design. What type of observational design is this? Is it a cross-sectional or is it a case control? In that regard, it's going to inform where we'll classify it for our what? Our risk of bias. So another, we can also refer, um, we can also mention our quality assessment as risk of bias. So the risk of bias still are diverse. So to commence this session, very beautiful session, we just have to have a run through of this. So this is a systematic review on enabling security, food security and food resilience on rural smallholder in sub-Saharan Africa and all that. So now what we talked about, we have our objectives, you know, which I've actually made a couple of comments, you know, in it. And we have our methods, our type of studies. And then in our type of studies here, we said that we are interested in including quasi-experimental studies, observational studies, which are now have to be, which needs to be bigger than this. Now we said we are not going to include anything of review literature and this. Now, when you look at this, you see that we are getting it wrong by including secondary data and this. So what we need to do is the first thing we need to do is that we need to revisit our studies, our 60 studies, right? Break this down, further classify it into design. So I have to look at this as design, right? Or we take it up as design or also then maybe break this down, right? So your ability to identify the design of each paper means you should have thoroughly read the full text at 60 studies. If you're saying that 60 studies are meeting your eligibility criteria, that means you must have read the full text, because when you look at the principles of the Prisma screening using the Prisma flow diagram, right? We have what we call the full text screening, which is where we assuming that what the full text of our articles have all been read. So this is what I'm talking about. Prisma. I hope we are following. We did a very good job, but then would have to be modified further. Okay, so all right. So when you look at good, so when you look at this, right? So if we're saying that our included studies are 60 papers, so that means during our eligibility check, we've read the full text, screening full text. So that means we should be able to identify the designs, right? So that should be well noted. So we need to go back and get that. But then before, without wasting much time, now we need to also show more clarity in our eligibility criteria, because in our eligibility criteria, we need to exclude what? Systematic review. So we need to spell it out properly, you know. So we can include systematic reviews in our as our included study only when we are conducting a what? A wide scoping review, right? A rapid review or a wide scoping review. That's when we can include systematic or literature review papers. So this is a systematic review already, so we can't put it as our design. Systematic review is a design. Systematic review design cannot, a systematic review paper cannot be in our what? Inclusion criteria. It can be part of our 60 papers, right? So we need to have only primary studies. When you say experiment, this is dumb. Like, we can't say experiment. That's not the design. We have a lot of type of experimental studies. It can be a quasi experimental study. It can be a randomized control trial. It can be a clinical trial. It can be a controlled crossover study. So all these things should be what? Well detailed if we want to have a very good publication, and we need to be on our toes with respect to this. So the same thing happens, a correlational secondary data. Is this a retrospective study? Is it a retrospective design, or is it a case report? So you need to further break these things down. So you see observation, report. What is, are we now doing a scoping review, or are we doing a systematic review? Because if we change the title to a scoping review, it can accommodate all these papers. Then in that situation, a quality assessment or a risk of bias assessment will not be eligible. It will have to go off. But for us to conduct a quality assessment for our systematic review, it means that we must be rigorous. It includes putting a report. A report is a gray literature, right? So this report can be a what? A gray literature. And already in your inclusion and exclusion criteria, you've already stated that what? That you're going to exclude what? Gray literature. Conference abstracts.
Can I say something, please?
All right.
Yes. For things like for those of reports, those with secondary data, I get it, it was realized during some of the when identifying. So that means that we have to take it out because it's
Yes.
already in the exclusion criteria that it shouldn't be there. So then we have to take it out of the 60 articles that will be.
Exactly.
delivering.
Exactly. Good. Beautiful. That has to be done. Okay. Good. All right. So now for those of us from the Nexus laboratory, you're not different because okay, so now this is what our quality assessment looks like. So I'm going to use so now because we need to get these things ready, our full study. So I'm going to use one of one a paper, one systematic review paper. Sorry, no, a primary paper, for example. All right, so I'm going to be using this publication as an example. Now let's use it. I'm going to bring three other publications that are in line with this for us to perform our what quality assessment. So let's check out another paper on occupational hazard to do our quality assessment. So we want to conduct quality assessments right away. So I think this is very simple. Even a layman can be able to can be able to at least do. So we have this paper, we have this paper. I'm also going to open another one. So I hope we're following.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, we are.
Mhm. All right. So these are three identical what papers. Now, what makes them identical is that they have one common variable, which is what hazard in healthcare, and this is what hazard in healthcare, and this is what hazard in healthcare. Good. Now, now, now let's go back here to get the more concise knowledge. Now you have your systematic review, right? So you have your systematic review article. So for mine, I'm going to choose health, like I say, occupational hazards in Africa, a systematic review. Okay, beautiful. Now, what I have to perform now is the what? Quality assessment. And now, I've explained quality assessment. QA entails rigorous screening for what? Common study. So this is just like a layman explanation of what QA. So QA is the rigorous screening for the risk or potential for the risk or potential towards bias, potential of bias toward for system for my studies included in a systematic what? In a what? In a literature. So you can conduct your quality assessment even in a what? In a literature review. Particularly if you're familiar with nursing practice. Nursing practice is not called a systematic review, it can be a literature review. And the word systematic review shouldn't be mentioned, it should be literature review and all that. So in a literature review or review of literature. All right, so I could now say for my quality assessment that for this systematic review on occupational hazards in Africa. So now before I continue here, you would remember I've already made an explanation that this table, I got this guy's table, right? So for quasi-experimental studies, that has been stated to be included in your inclusion and exclusion criteria or randomized studies. So all these are all experimental studies. So I have said that for experimental studies, right? So the gold standard, what we call it is the gold standard for our quality assessment is what we call the what? We use what we call the what? The Cochrane risk of bias tool. We also have what we call the what? The updated risk of bias tool. So the Cochrane risk of bias tool contains what? 7 domains. It contains what? 7 domains. So that means what it means is that what? If we have 5 studies that has been included, which are quasi-experimental studies, we're going to screen them based on the domains. But for the basics of this class, this tonight, I'm going to work with what? Common cross-sectional study. That was one of my publications in 2022 on our examination of occupational hazards. And I'm going to use it as an included study, for what? Performing the quality assessment of that particular what? Mini task. So with the information I'm going to provide there, we are going to use it to do what? To execute ours. So the Cochrane risk of bias tool and updated risk of bias tool, the difference is that the updated risk of bias tool was updated in 2019. What was the reason for the update in the risk of bias? We have checklists, right? So for example, marriage is a what? Marriage is a study. Marriage we go into every day is a study. And from time to time, there are templates that we use in what? Assessing marriage. For you to assess the quality of any marriage, you bring a what? A religious tool. First of all, is the woman happy? Second, has DNA been performed? Thirdly, has this happened? Fourthly, this. And at the end of the day, once all the questions in that particular tool, religious tool, which is the risk of bias tool now, which is the quality assessment tool, has all been passed, we can say that that individual, right, is having a what? A successful marriage. So that marriage as a design for that particular individual is successful. So we can rate the marriage as what? Out of the 7 tools, which includes DNA, woman being happy, the man being not cheating, and the 4th one. So we can now say what? 4. So that means everything was present for that particular guy. We can now say, okay, it is rated 4/4. So the marriage has what? 4/4. So we can say it has what? High quality. We can rate it as what? High quality. And there was a reason for this example to drag us into this because of what we relate to on today's what? Toxic internet. So now, for these experimental studies, the Cochrane risk of bias tool was updated because of what? There were some certain tools that started falling off. So that means For people to now introduce, maybe before, for us to rate marriage, we wouldn't bring in DNA. Now, there is now an update in the tool for marriage where we have now attached what DNA. So, what the updated risk of bias to, the Cochrane updated risk of bias to means is that what we now have a new domain that is very, very important. So, before when we were using the Cochrane risk of bias, you can see the Cochrane risk of bias to. It's not that it's outdated, but it's just that there are some certain parameters that it doesn't account for. That sinks into our score. So, for observational studies, we have a lot of tools. Somebody might be asking, what is this Cochrane risk of bias or what is these tools? I showed that in our previous session. So if you look at for the observational studies here, we have the Newcastle-Ottawa scale, right? So that means if my 3 articles here, 1, 2, 3, are sessional studies, then that means I'm going to use the what? I might decide to use the Newcastle-Ottawa scale, then I have to justify it in my write-up, or I might decide to use the critical appraisal skill program form, which is the CAPS tool. I might decide to use the what? Mixed method tool. I might decide to use the what? Joanna Briggs Institute to checklist form, right? I might decide to use the what we call the what? The Risbon tool. There's something we call the Risbon tool. So we have diverse what too. We have also the ESPRON. So these are what all diverse tools that we need to go through. So you see here, Newcastle Ottawa for what? Cross-sectional studies. So we open it, right? Now, this is the what? This is the what? The domains for the what? For the Newcastle what? Ottawa scale. And we can use this particular domain now to do what? To score our what? Our study. I'm going to demonstrate that and bring this class to an end, because risk of bias or quality assessment is the most simplest part of any this. What the basic thing I need you guys to do is to get your designs right. Once you get your designs right, every other thing is easy. You and your colleague, you guys go through it, read this, check it in the papers, and score it, and that's it. So you mustn't start. You can't start until you make sure that your included studies are all what? Aligning with your what? Your eligibility criteria. They all mean, not when we've now come for the screening, and behold, we are seeing studies that still does not meet the inclusion criteria. So when we don't have studies that don't meet the inclusion criteria, you see that it becomes a problem. So now, moving ahead, the essence of expansion, so that when you watch it, you get to understand much more better what we're talking about. So we also have what we call the Robbins tool. We have the CASP and all that. So depending on the number of domains, that will depend on our scoring. So if here for the Newcastle Tower, remember that some of all these things can still be readapted by you, right? What do I mean? That you might decide to, instead of having 5 domains here, you might decide to split all this. Everything depends on agreement. That is why it's a systematic review. A systematic review means that what? That you follow a reproducible pattern. So that when you've now written down the steps that you follow. Can we hear me?
Yes, we
Are
can.
we here? Okay, good. So that when another person follows, so what does it imply? So what it implies is that for here, if we were to use the Newcastle Tower scale, so I could say maybe, okay, it's got 5 domains, right? 5. So 5 domain, I'm going to rate it, score it what? I'm going to score the highest, 5/5. Remember, there's a special explanation for the Cochrane risk of bias too. the particular in terms of scoring. So the same thing applies here. I'm going to score it 10 over 10. I'm going for the math. I'm going to score it 10 over 10. So 10 over 10. So if it has, for example, let's say it has 9 domains, then I'm going to score it what? 9 over 9. Okay, so good. So you are also the person to create your what? The cutoff point. What do I mean by the cutoff point? You'll be the one to create the cutoff point in the sense that the high quality, you can have moderate, and you have what's low quality. So to create your cutoff point, you guys would agree. You agree that, let's say, for example, if we are to use the cast tool, we can say from less than 4 over less than 5 over 10 is what? Low quality signifies studies that we are rated what? Less than 5 over 10. So moderate signifies studies that we are from 5 over 10 to maybe 6 over 10, right? Then for high quality, we can say studies that are greater than what? 6 over 10. So that implies studies that are rated from 7 over 10 up. So yeah, I know everything is whole lot of mathematics has entered. So how are we gonna do this now? So this is subjective. What do I mean by subjective is you will be the one to rate it yourself. So you guys will be the ones to decide. So probably if the third reviewer sees it, I can type say, okay, no, let's change the rating. So all these things was actually decided. So you take the midpoint. The midpoint is going to be your moderate. So now, what is all this? What is all this that we are talking about? What is this? So now, what we are talking about is this now. An average systematic reviewer here has studies, right? So let's return back here. Good. So now let's return back here. So this is my review question, occupational hazards in Africa. So I've defined these, then yada yada yada. I've put in a lot of literature, information. Then I'll now say for this semantic review of original, for example, let me say the CAPS 2. CAPS means critical appraisal skill program 2, right? Will, or depending on the nature, if it's past your proposal, so it's going to be, if it's past your protocol for registration on Prospero, now you're writing the manuscript. So what you need to use now, the test should be was used for this study screening. No, sorry. Was used for performing the what? The quality assessment or slash risk or slash was used for ascertaining the risk of bias of the what? Included studies. Now you go ahead to tell us the CAPS 2 contains 10 domains, which include, you might decide to list them, you list all the domains. Now let's assume, so for my example, right, I'll be using the, so for this, I'm not using this. I'm not going to use this because this is mostly for cross-sectional course. So let me use the CAS. I could also use that. You can use anyone because of the number of domains so that we can have a table, and it makes a lot of sense. So the CAPS 2. So I'm going to open the CAPS website to download my tool because I'm explaining it. All right, so all right, so okay, so let me assume I'm gonna use. Okay, all right, so let me hold on. So okay, so okay, all right, so yeah, so I'm trying to open up all the tools. Okay, so let me open the next one. So this is the domains. Open this. All right, so yes, I'm sure you guys can hear me because all right, so we can return back to our table. Good. So these are still our domains. So now I want us to understand that we have the Robbins tool is for observational studies, right? Generally. So it will be very imperative for you to use a tool that is delimited to that particular design. You can still use the Robbins tool. With there have been scenarios where we use the gaps for case control to look at cross-sectional studies. They are still used, but it's more better for you to use a much more clearer tool. You understand that is specific for that particular word design. So that's going to help you to get the it's going to help you to get the particular information or the particular information that you need, and it will help you to properly screen the study. All right, so these are all the checklists. So these are all checklists that are that, are, that could be used, to screen for the study. So if we've got qualitative study, we can check out CABs for qualitative studies, mixed method study, we have the MMR2 and all that. So now let's go. We have for anything that is a physiological evidence, if we have a study that's specifically that is a physiological evidence, we'll use what we call the Pedro scale, right? So we use a Pedro scale. All right, so we have so these are more like the scale we use for what for quality assessment. So now, so returning back here beautifully, so we have this, so we will have to customize this. Now, if you look at this particular checklist, right, we have 11 questions. This, we have this, we have this, and we also have room for comments. So for not those of us that are from the next lab, so for those of us that are addressing the nutritional review, Dr. IBK, you will have to make comments for any particular score you assign at any domain, you must what? Make comments. Why did you assign that? Right? So it's very, very important. So the CAPS checklist actually makes it very, very clear on for your risk of bias, as well as the Robin scale and the Cochrane score bias. So, all right, so back here, so the first thing we do is to draw out our table for our quality assessment. So here, I'm going to talk about the, okay, I'm going to use the Newcastle Ottawa 2, which contains 5 core domains, which include, so I'm going to list them, then I will now say that the cutoff point for the screening, no, not the screening, for the risk of bias assessment was placed on, then you would recall what I explained here. Was placed on. Now you would now go ahead to explain that the cutoff point for the risk of bias assessment was generally, you can say, was generally rated to be high quality, moderate quality, and low quality. Right? Now, you can also use another one, high risk. Now, high risk now is more like for this, low quality. Low risk now signifies this, and what? Moderate. Now, depending on how you want to write it, so it's subject. This is the subjective process of your writing, which is it's going to be informed by you and your what, and the person that is reviewing it, but you must follow the established guidelines. So mostly if we are dealing with experimental studies, we use this. Mostly when we are doing effective interventions, we use high risk interventions, low risk or moderate risk. So let's assume this doesn't exist. So when you've written this, now you now come here to make an argument. Now, the cutoff point for the risk of bias assessment was generally rated to be high risk, high quality, moderate quality, and this. Now, studies were assigned to be of high quality or good quality, depending on how you say, to be of high quality if they answered, I'm trying to use diverse words, or contained, they were to be, the studies were assigned to be of high quality if they answered what? If they appropriately, you can say, if they appropriately answered or contained or fulfilled spell fulfilled. Okay, let me leave it for the nursery one children. If they fulfilled 6/10 greater than 6/10 of the what? Of the questions or scale or rating of the domain of Okay, check. So all I'm doing here is just to relate the idea, right? So you might read it in my sound, but that is just the idea. This is just the idea. The essence is just to set out all the academic terms that are appropriate in this particular section that you are going to use to do your work, to rate your quality assessment. So when you want to write it, you can choose one of them, then properly structure it and put it. Then for moderate, remember that this all your cutoff points that you're scoring here would be informed by the total number of domains, and that is only applicable for non-randomized studies. If it is for when you're doing a quality assessment using a Cochrane tool, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way because let's say, for example, your allocation concealment is 0, or it was not spotted. That means the entire work will have low risk, even if other places has 6/7. But one particular domain, what I'm trying to say is that if in terms of experimental studies, remember that clinical studies have high confidence interval, right? So if it's when you're using the Cochrane risk of bias tool, your rating, the pattern of rating will change, and it only changes for what randomized to, because when you have 0, when you score 0 to something like blinding, it is possible that the total work will have what a very high risk. Imagine that somebody went into the field, you want to do, let's say, for example, prevalence of HIV and AIDS, or prevalence of tuberculosis, or prevalence of whatever, significant um, key disease, right? And you now want to do, you didn't blind the participants to know that you're not conducting a research. Once in that primary paper, it is noted that blinding is 0. It means that the work has a significant high risk. But maybe other parts like randomization, which is another domain, can be scored 0. Maybe it might still be low risk or moderate, but that doesn't apply there. But now let's continue with this. So now what we need to understand now here is that we rate it. So for moderate, so moderate is going to be 4/6. So these are non-randomized studies, right? Was that the rating? We said 5/6. For moderate is going to be 5/10 to 6/10. Then so they have high, low risk, low quality. Low quality when they were what? 6 less than what? 5/10. Less than 5/10 is not 5/10. So that's from 4/10, 3/10, 0/10, 1/10, 2/10. All right, so that's the way. So the next thing you do is you project your table. Okay, so I have to now project my table. So here is the study author. So this is going to be, now what's going to be contained here are those domains. Now for those of us that are not, now here will be our comment. Here will be our overall rating. So what is going to be here is going to be total number of domains that we have. Remember, this is a cross-sectional study, and we're using the Cochrane risk of bias tool. So I'm going to go down there. So let me use the randomization. So here now we have the first case, which is representative of the cases, truly representative of the HCC. Now this is a Newcastle Tower scale that is drawn from the table. Now let us look at a more proper scale. Newcastle Tower scale. Okay. All right. So remember that you can fit it in depending on your what? Depending on your what? On your questions. All right. So for example, here, so it's mostly appropriate for cohort studies, the nucleus of our scale. So I'll just find out that. Okay, so look at this. Look at the PDF of the scale. So this is it. This is the scale. All right, so for example, here we could also check out we can use axis as well. Okay, good. Yes, exactly. So this is what I'm looking for. So we will use axis we can still use CASP for we can use NOS for cross-sectional studies, but let us use axis so that it's going to give us the perfect fitting that we need for what. So what it means, we return back to our study. So we are going to say, so that we use the what? Axis 2 contains 10 domains. So you check it out. 20 domains. So we go back. I'm making sure we have that particular full participation. We can use, there has been diverse times where we can present axis 2 as 10 domains, right? So what it means that by presenting as 10 domains means that there are some certain elements of the domains here that might not be of interest to us, and they wouldn't really affect the quality of our findings. But there are still some key what information. So now this is how it's going to go. Now let's drop with this, right? Now the fourth thing here now is this. Now let me turn this table in a much more easier manner. So up is going to be our what? Here is going to be our studies. So here is going to be our what? We're going to call here our what? Domain 1. So by domain 1, I mean domain 2, domain 3, domain 4, domain 3. We're going to call here our domain 4. So by domain 4, it is the questions that are contained in the what? That are contained in the axis 2. So we have domain 5, we have domain 6, domain 7, domain 8, domain 9, domain 10. So we continue. So we have to take our time. Domain 11, what about domain 12, of domain 13, domain 14, domain 15, 16, domain 16, domain 17, 18, domain 19. I'm going to call it our what? Domain 20. So now the next thing here is going to be our what? Our overall rating, right? Then you can put here our comment. Or no, let's see. Oh, here is going to be our overall rating. There's going to be our what? Comment. So this is the comment for, this is the first study. This is my paper. This is my paper. Innocent et al. 2022. So this is the class proper now, but we use just 3 papers, okay? Now, I'm also going to explain something here. So let me close up this. So I've explained this already. It's clear that we have diverse word checklists. We have a lot of them. So we close it. Now I have the second paper from this person. And this is the what? This is equally a 2022 paper. This guy et al. It is in upper 2022. And then we're going to have so we're going to have this. Who is this person? And this is a 2016 paper. So we will also include this as our so it's going to be what 2016. Okay, so yes, so it assumed that we have what just 3 included studies. Now this is the point. Now the point now is that the cutoff point, it was high quality, low quality, moderate quality, and what low quality. Now studies were assigned high quality. Now for a study to be rated 1, now we need to explain that now. Now, in a case where the domain or the question was present in the study, or the criteria, we say in the case the criteria for a domain was met in the study, comma, it was rated as 1. Now, in the case where the domain, where the criteria, which is the domains, all this. Now, listen, what I should have written out all the questions here, but there is no time for that. So what we classify it as domain, but I'm going to explain what I meant by that. Now, in the case where the criteria was not met, right? It was rated as 0. Now, in a case where it was partially met, it was rated as 0.5, for example. Now, before we now say that studies were assigned of high quality if they fulfilled greater than 6/10, that's overall total rating. So here now is going to be what? Over 20. So you choose your cutoff point. Same to you. You still choose your cutoff point. So you can do your cutoff point as what? From 14, getting at 14 to this. Then you might decide to do your moderate from 9 to 13, 9 over 20 to what? To 13, 13 over to what? 20. Then less than 9 over what? 20 is what? Low quality. Sorry. Right? Beautiful. So that means now what it implies is that now when we come to domain 1, we go to your quality assessment tool. You jump in there. Let me clear all this so that we can have a more closer access. Remember, I've already explained all this. Now, I raise all these papers up. I raise all this. Now, I come to what? The first domain, aims. Where the aims and objectives of this paper of the study clear. Now I open this paper and I go through my paper. Now, already, it's expected that your judgment for your quality assessment should come from the full text. So I read from the full text of my paper, and here I clearly made it clear here that I aimed back then in 2021, I aimed to examine the common occupational hazard of this and that. So it is clear. So I come to my table here, I score it 1, right? So what in another scenario, what I would have written here now is what? Clear aim. But instead of listing out all this information here, instead of me listing out all this information here, it's going to take a lot of time. So what it means is that if you're going to use Q1 or domain 1, or you're going to P1P, you will now come at the bottom of your table and write here B1. D1 means key, more like key. It means this was the aim clear. You now put the semicolon. D2, it means, right? So you must make sure that the reviewer knows what you are doing. So this is going to be our what? Q2. Difficult to copy, right? So this is going to be our Q2. Okay, so this is going to be our what? This is going to be our what? Q2, Q3. So you outline them. You make sure you do what? You outline them, right? Good. So this is our what? Appraisal for what? Cross-sectional study. So mine is a cross-sectional study. So here, I'm going to close this as well. Don't save. So I've already told you what to do here. All right, good. Now, so I rate it what? 1. So let's assume I want to finish up with my own. So I return it back to D1. So I want to finish up with this. So let me go to this guy's study. I know. So let's check his study, his paper. Was it clear? Was the aim clear? So we go down. It's clear from the abstract. It's already clear there. So we check out from the background. So the essence of looking at the background is to make sure we as get all the information. So it's clear. The aim is clear. Therefore, this paper is designed to assess the magnitude of work related as it is clear. So we go back to our we rate 1. So we are using you guys are using, for those of us that are for this review, we are using confidence. So while if there is any unclarity, if there's any conflict, you will have to bring in your independent reviewer to resolve it. I hope the class is making sense. If I should hear from you guys.
Very well, sir.
Okay, good, good, good.
It is.
All right, so you go to the next study from ALK here, right? So you check out the first, so it's still clear, the aim is clear. Literally, all studies have to score 1 here. They all have to meet the criteria. So for the next domain, D2, right? For the next domain being D2, here it illustrates was the study design appropriate for the stated aim? Now this is where it now comes out to play. So you check out the what? You check out the study. Now this is a what? Cross-sectional study, right? This is a what? This is a descriptive study where I and my colleagues, we examine the common occupational hazards among healthcare workers. Now, and from the question here, it was supposed to be descriptive. So meaning that what we were to adopt what a hospital-based what cross-sectional study. So if a hospital-based cross-sectional study was what appropriate for what for screening of what this what it was appropriate for what it was an appropriate design for this particular study. So we noted, so it was clear. So I also do what? I score it what? 1. Then the next one, I return back to this study by INL. I check it out. Was the study design clearly stated? So I check it. An institutional based constitutional study was taken, so it's clear. Remember, we are using a CAT tool, so they all should align. So I do what? I score it 1. Then I move to the next part, the study by Aluko, the Aluko study. I check it out. Was the study design stated? I check it. Now I check it, I read it, return back to the abstract. The cross-sectional design was utilized, so it's clear. 1. Now we move to the third domain. We move to the third domain. The third domain was the sample size justified? Was it even stated and was it justified? Was it justified? So I check out my study, which was obviously justified. It wasn't because here, okay, it was a proposed sample. Now sample size, right? So a proposed sample was used for this study in repeating total of 94 person who participated in this study. Now I justified it now by saying that this type of proposed sampling used was okay. I think it was in my full draft, but judgments are going to be made by this. So the type of sample size was actually clearly stated, but the calculation was not present. But if you look at this paper here by these guys here, for the sample size, if you look at this paper here for the sample size, the sample size, single population was used to calculate the sample, okay, it was clear. So mine was partially, it was partially, right? It's partially. So here, this study was clear, and for the last study, after you check it out, you look at the full text of the study. Description, methods, the climate was this, you talk about the location, sample size that was using species, so it was clear, right? So good. So it was clear. So mine was 0.5, it was partially because I haven't stated how I calculated it. And besides, there was no sample size calculation for this study because it was a proposed sample. So alternatively, you can also mark this as 1. or 0. So no, 1 or 0.5 as being partial. So we'll move on to the next domain. Now remember that the systematic review is performed by what? Is performed by more than 3 people, more than 2 people. Meaning that it's not just going to be only my judgment. If it's only my judgment, then that means there's potential for bias. So it means that I will make my judgment, you will make your judgment. Then when there's any conflict, we can do or reconcile. That's why those of you from Nexus, it's very imperative that you have 2 participants. So at the end of the day, when you're done screening, your colleague screens, you guys can be able to do what? Reconcile it. So here, for the next domain here is what? Was the target population clearly defined? Now, I check my paper. I did that for sure because I said that it was going to involve what? All category of what? Healthcare workers will be sampled. So this particular type of this. So if you go up here, you're going to see that what? I mentioned that what? I'm going to include what? Both non-clinical and clinical healthcare workers. So it was written all over it, in my study. So I'm going to score that as what? 1. Then I'm going to now open the next study. Now I'm going to say the participants. So all selected participants were workers in these who fulfill the criteria. So it was clearly defined. And I'm also going to check for this as well before leaving this page. Yes, so they were all defined here, healthcare workers and all that, all cadre. So they were all defined, right? So it was scored 1, 1. So that is how I will continue, So I'm gonna move on to the next checklist. I'm gonna say, was sample from taken from an appropriate population base so that it was closely represented. Now, what this implies here now is that most times when we want to draw our sample and we draw it from what? A total population, right? But for my study, Department of Healthcare Studies is what we call photomedicals in photo. It was drawn from what? Is a representative of what? Of the population. So that means everybody here was represented. In short, I sampled everybody. So what fulfills that criteria for mine is what? 1. And if I want to check the next paper, whether was it drawn, already it was calculated. There was a sample size calculation. Once there is a sample size calculation, what it means is that what? We've now calculated a specific group that will represent the entire population, that will make inference of the total population. So already what that is going to be 1, 1, because sample size calculation was what? Was calculated. But in mine, I represented everybody, meaning that it was what? Everybody had a chance of being what? Of being a part of it. So I moved to the 6th domain quickly. Was the selection process likely to select subjects that we are representative of? Now, what selection process did I adopt? Now here we are doing, I use the what? A purposive sampling technique. So by using the purposive sampling techniques, right, it was possible for me to select all the participants from what? From DHS. Now here, compared to this place, the sampling technique here was stratified. So what it means is that what? It was possible for us to do what? Select people from all strata. And the same thing also applies in this second paper, right? The sample selection technique, it was also stratified. So that means that particular sampling technique made it possible for what? For us to be able to what? Select all the participants. Remember that for you to use any checklist, you must be knowledgeable with research. Meaning that what? You must have knowledge of what? Statistical interpretation, particularly research in terms of what? Sampling. So research terminology, it has to be something you what? Very, very familiar with. So we move on also. We are measures taken to address and categorize non-responders. Now, what this means is that usually when you're calculating for sample size, right, you calculate for what? attraction bias, right? What we call non-response rate. So now we need to now check it out. Already in my paper, it was not because I sampled everybody. So that is going to be what? That is going to be scored what? 0. In my paper, it is going to be scored what? 0. And also, in this paper, we will now check the sample size. If there was error for what? Now here is it. A sample was used to correct. Now the sample considered the following as assumption. Confidence level, margin of error was 0.5 was considered. This was a good final population, and non-response rate was added. So that means it was measures we are taking, right? So we mark it as what? 1. Now we check the last paper, the third paper. Was there? Yes, there was. You can see it here. For what? Non-response. Now check it. It utilized this. So margin of error was 5%. Then this now less than this. In addition, minimum sample size increased to 260 was rounded up. Minimum sample size was added for non-response. So that is going to be what? 1. I hope we are following.
Yes, we are.
All right, good.
Yes, we
Now
are.
we move on to the next part, where the risk factor and outcome variables measured appropriate with respect to the aims of the study. Now, this when we talk about the risk factor and outcome variables, now this in our methods, we usually state the potential outcomes what to be anticipated, and mostly we usually measure it from what? We usually measure it from our what? So particularly in some particular studies, we can measure it from our outcome tool, the particular research tool that we want to use for our investigation. Or and if it's an RCT or an experiment, then we can actually have a section where we can say, okay, these are for outcome measures, right? Outcome and measures. But generally, in our tool here, you can see here that actually we stated here that okay, consists of information on demographics, questions on this, that. So all these are questions that we use to ascertain our outcomes, right? And what we are going to use in measuring them is what? It's going to be a questionnaire, because at the end of the day here, we can score to get our outcome variable or knowledge, we have to use a questionnaire to score that. And that also should also be appropriate here. Here, measurement. Are you seeing it here? Measurement. So for our measurement here, we're definitely still using a structured questionnaire here to measure lifestyle. Maybe here, we want to use Chromback coefficient. Okay, we also want to check, the diverse hazards, right? So we are definitely going to use what? A tool that's appropriate. So the same thing actually applies here. Here, our KAP scores actually noted, so it's just basically in the 3 studies, right? So we're going to score them 1. Your ability to interpret is very important. That is where we come in. Okay, beautiful. All right, so the next is going to be our what? Now we look at the next domain, and they say we are the risk factor or outcome variables measured correctly using instruments piloted and trained. So when we looked at it, we saw that we have our reliability and what? And reliability and validity. So it's all there. We have our questionnaires and all that. So they were all appropriately what? Measured. There might not be need to return back then. So we go to our 10th domain, right? Is it clear what was used in statistical significance or precision estimates, p-values? And now we look at our what? Our data in analysis. I clearly stated it there in my data analysis. You see, it was not stated in my paper, right? The p-value, it wasn't stated. It wasn't stated in my paper. So that is going to be what? That is going to be what? 0. Because I used what we call descriptive statistics. Now we go down here. You see that first of all, the alpha tangible values were stated. Right? And also we go down here to data analysis, the p-value was stated. The probability values are all what? Stated. The confidence interval, CI means confidence interval. If you look at the checklist, they are asking you here, was it determined, is it clear what was used to define statistical significance or precise estimate? So if you look at mine, you see that there is none. I just use what we call descriptive statistics and percentages, right? So we're here, there are what? There are other statistical association, tests like p-value or confidence interval. They were all used. So if you check out this paper, the last paper, you'll find it here, right? All right, so that means it's going to 0, 1, 1. Now we'll move to the next, the 11th domain, where the methods include statistical method. So it was described. All the studies are clearly showing the statistical method. Now, what do I mean by that? Here, I showed that I used descriptive statistics to analyze my data entry and all that. The same thing applied here after checking and cross-checking. All these were showed, and the same thing applies here for data analysis. You can see it here. You can see it. They are all explained, right? Good. So everybody explained that. So it's going to be 1, 1, 1. So we move to the 12th. Now we come to the results, where the basic data adequately described. Now, when you look at the results here, the first thing in the results is what? The basic data. What do you mean by this? The demographic data, right? So they were all described. Male were these, females, Yoruba ethnicity, and all that, right? So we check out this paper before we go up. The results, the total of this, it was also described. Check out this paper as well in the results. It was also described the basic data. So these are the basic data or bio data. So everybody gets a fair share of 1, 1, 1. Now remember that my cutoff tools were all subjective. I was the one that just chose it for the explanation of this class. Okay, so you can actually do that for yourself. Now, does the response rate raise concern about the non-response bias? Now, look at what this means, right? Now, at the beginning of the study, right, already I didn't account for that, right? I didn't account for that, so it's going to be a 0 because I already when you remember the question for my response bias, I already marked it as 0. So that means for these other two papers, what it means is that we need to check out the percentage of what was the sample size calculated. Now let's compare it with what we have. And we will now check, is it too big? Is it raising any special concern? Now, if we return back here to the method here, that's so if we return back to the data analysis here, we can actually see that so let's assume we go through this paper, right? Kind of spot out where, okay, it yielded 326. So that for the sample size was 260. Now this is when the response rate was added. Now let's now check. Now remember that the question in the domain now is that does the response data now that means the people now that now answered the question after we've adjusted for attention, does it raise any concern about the non-response? Now let's now check this versus the total number of people that are responding. So how do we get that? We get that from the table. So that is going to, so n here is what? 260. So that means we anticipated 260. So if you want to actually get it, so from this category now, these are people that chose 166 plus 76, 74 plus 20 is going to give you 260. So it doesn't raise any concern. It doesn't raise any concern. So if our response data here was less than, you see, I'm now teaching research now. We're no longer, well, if it was less than 236, that means there is a call for concern. That means meaning that even after we adjusted for non-response to increase it, and it's still very less, let's say it's 181, that means there is a concern. And that means we're going to mark it as what? We're going to mark it as what? 0, because it's not fulfilling the criteria. So that means probably there is no response. So already here, you can see that, it's absent from my tool. I'm going to rate it 0, 1. It doesn't raise any concern. Then I'm going to check out this other paper. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Here we have 290. So we check out what was the sample size was. So this, yeah, probably just put it in here, 290. It was rounded up to 290. And we still have in our result 290. So it doesn't, so we still mark it as what? 1. Now we go to the 14th tool. I'm taking my time to ensure that we complete this so that we can. Now, if appropriate, was information about non-responders described? So no, it was basically not. It was basically not described, but we check it out. It's already 260 and 260 and 290. So that means that there is no other information to be described. I hope we understood the logic. So it's 260 and 260. So there was never going to be any time they will be discussing people who didn't respond. All right, so we go to the 15th. So were the results internally consistent? What internal consistency means is what? Reliability. So what was the reliability result? So we check it out. So now, for our reliability, for our coefficient reliability, now there's something we call redundancy, and what? Redundancy. Now, when the coefficient of the Cronbach coefficient is less than 0.5, then that means that what? It is what? Not internally, it is not internally what? Consistent. When it is at 0.5 to 0.6, it is what? It's mildly consistent. Now, when it is greater than 0.6, now this is the scale, it's various. Most of this is various. You can actually open other guides and they'll tell you that, but mostly for Cronbach coefficient for cross-sectional study. Once it's greater than 0.6, that means it's redundant. If it is 1.0, it is too redundant. It is too redundant. If it is what? 1.0, it is too redundant. That means it's highly internally consistent. So that means when we check out my paper, so you get that findings here. You're going to get it from 0.8. So it is what? Redundant. So I'm going to take one. It's been a hell long 0 going ahead with my paper. But then when you check out these on the second paper, the internal consistency, which is the reliability, then you'll find that here. You'll find it somewhere here. It is here. I see it. Can you see it? So it is there. So it is one. So we check the next paper. PayPal, not PayPal. So we go back to check the internal consistency. We get that here. Okay. So it should be stated here after the tool was pre-tested, errors this, error this, had this, and you come down, enhancement rate of this was that. Are you seeing it? I hope you can see it. That's a very high comeback coefficient. It's, are you seeing it? Can you see it?
Yes, sir.
You can see it here. It has a high comeback
Yes, we can.
alpha value of this, which indicates a high level of what? Internal consistency. So this is just basically what we need to, so some of the things we need to know here are now more like you need to be good with research. It's very, very important. Sorry. So where the results presented for all the analysis described in the methods. So obviously they were. So what do they mean? What they mean is that when you come to the methodology and you're saying that you will do this, you will do this, you analyze this, you analyze that. I hope you did it in the results also. So it looks like it was, because this paper is very, very wonderful. Basically all the results. So you check that out as well. There is nothing that was said in the methodology that will be done that was not done. So that's happened too in my paper. I did everything that I said. I know to talk much, but I did it. So I said that I'm going to present it in pie charts, tables, and so you can obviously find the pie charts. Where is that pie chart? Okay, you can't find it. So these are actually all the results. So everybody's definitely going to score one. So we are talking about here analysis described. So it was for everybody. It was for everybody, basically. So the same thing happens here, and you see the pie charts. So all these were all present in my thesis. Okay, so you judge by your paper. So everybody's going to get what? One. Okay, then we'll move to the 17th domain. We are getting closer. We're getting closer. This is almost 10 o'clock. And the next question here comes into our discussion. We are the authors' discussions justified by the results. So obviously you could check out that, I discussed all my findings, and I started from here considering this, based on the results. I discussed this, I made arguments, in this paper, I argued this, that. I argued in contrast, same happened in this paper. All the discussions were argued, well argued, and same happened in this paper. They also, not me now, they argued, right? So that's it. So everybody goes what? So remember, this is the question, so that you don't get lost. We are the author's discussions and conclusions justified by the result. So that is the discussion, right? That is the discussion. Now, look at what it means now. This study revealed that majority of the healthcare workers, both clinical, experience one type of occupational hazards. Now, remember, this is what it is. This is what the discussion is about. This is what the objective is all about. So that means in my conclusion, I made sure I was looking at occupational hazard about health, among both clinical and non-clinical healthcare workers. The study reviewed that the results could be affected by record bias and this and that. So these are the limitations as well. I'm picking up my next point. The result could have been faced by these, nevertheless, this provided. So these are the possible limitations. I also stated it. Know that it is hidden here so that you won't say, oh, I didn't see any limitation. Then I'll now jump out. So I'm answering these other questions as well. Were the limitations of the study discussed? Yes, I did in my paper. And I also got that. So I'm going to mark this 17th 1 and 18th 1. Then I check out for this. The next paper, I want to check their discussion. Look at their limitation and the conclusion. The study concluded a high degree of occupational hazard among that. That aligns with the discussion. So it is. So I'm going to mark the second paper also what? 1, 1. Then the next one, the last paper, I'm going to now say, okay, I go down there. We saw the discussion. It has the limitation, was well noted. I'm saying there was okay, and the conclusion also. The flaws in those why these. Therefore, it is required that consider powers which stay aligns, right? So good. So the reason why I'm saying this is that we need to know that certain limitations might be placed outside of that. Okay, so the number 19. So we are finally getting to an end. And were there any funding sources that may affect the author's interpretation of this? So for mine, it's going to be a no. There was no funding. I didn't get any funding, so that's going to be a 1. Because if there is, then it's going to be a 0. So that's going to be it's going to be a 1, we're correct. So no funding sources to affect the interpretation of the study, and that's going to be 1 as well. And none. So there was no funding sources. Okay, so for number 20, it's very simple here. They said, was there ethical approval attend? So I checked my paper. I did talk about that. I talked about that here in my methods. So I talked about ethics. I obtained a letter of introduction from Department of Public Health before the research, and I also obtained informed consent and all that. So I did. So I note that one. Then I go to the next paper. Did they obtain informed consent? Okay, so we properly go through the paper. This is a very crucial part of the research. So it's usually found in the method. So yes, this is it. It was obtained. The letter was obtained from university ethical, whatever. So you note that as 1. Then for the last paper, was informed consent obtained? Did they obtain informed consent? So we go up. We usually find that at the methods, at the base of the methods. Rather. So yes, ethical approval was approved by this. Prior to the verbal consent, were all informed and all that. So they did get that. So this is what. Yeah. I hope we all got what I did.
Yes, so yes, but
All right. So I okay. Yeah, so that seems very clear. So we can now rate the scores 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So we can rate this as what? 14.5 over 20. Then we can rate this as how many zero? There is no zero. 20 over 20. 20, 20. So we can say what? Now we check our cutoff point. So we can say what? Good quality, high quality, high. Exactly. I hope that's clear.
yes,
All right. So are there questions? I'm sure the class was very, 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 very self-explanatory. And I want to really thank you. So I think you guys followed up. So any question before we call it a day? Any question, Miss Uzamaka, Abigail, Jonathan, Akbon, and Innocent Joseph. I hope the class is very clear. So very clear.
yes, sir.
All right. That's nice. Okay, so I'm going to send the recording to you guys. I'm going to send it to you people.